We're doing a film that I love today. I'm completely astonished by. I've done a love letter on this movie before. Um, have a mega crush on the director, Sofia Coppola. Oh my god. we're still not convinced on how to say Menad, which will play a role in this analysis. I'm here with Joey. My name's Zachary Conan. Thanks for joining us today. I said a lot of what I wanted to say in the love letter, but I'll reiterate some of it. And there are a lot of things I didn't mention in it. The love letter is more focused on Sofia Coppola, her body poetics, and on her muses and things like that. There's tons of things we didn't talk about, or I didn't talk about on there. But definitely check out that video. If I'm not too lazy, you'll see a link for it, right now.
Bam.
I don't know, maybe I was too lazy. I don't know. But we're going to jump right into it right now. What was your initial... Joey and I hadn't seen this movie. It might as well have been our first time seeing it because we had remembered nothing about it. We watched it maybe 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah, I saw it.
Time.
I think I was in middle school when I saw it.
Yeah, I count it as our viewing as really my first time watching it because even when I did watch it, I was way too immature. I was more naive than the teenage boys in the film, played by Jonathan Tucker among a few others. I was more naive than them, so I liked watching it. I don't know. Go on. What was your initial response?
Initial response, it just had a very visceral effect for sure with I would say the color palettes and the overall dreamscape and how it would contrast that with the moments of harsh reality in the film.
Absolutely, I'm going along with you. That's probably my first reaction to the movie because within the first, 35 seconds, you get an idea of Coppola's body poetics. I call them her hyper poetic style, which is really found in, like you said, the color palette and in the sound editing, which you were hinting at just then.
Right, because the first opening scene, you have the sweeping dreamscape of suburbia, and it's soft and yellow and green, and very green is kind of a recurring color in the film to represent almost like a life, but in a dreamy way, when the girls come back to the school after the suicide, and they were oh, the pamphlets are green.
I would say the two most primary colors in this are green and yellow or blonde, depending on how you want to identify that color.
I would say the third color would be blue, though.
Yeah.
Because right after the sweeping dreamscape of suburbia, with the music and all of that, it just all of a sudden harshly cuts to the scene of Cecilia.
And it's natural sound, too, because it's it's either part of the film score or some very popular pop song of the era, and then it harsh cuts into natural sound. It's not empty sound, it's not nothingness, but it's just you hear everything. You hear the air conditioning on in the background dripping from drips of water from the bathtub.
Yeah.
And she does that probably half a dozen times throughout the film, if not more, because it's repeated at the dance. It would be silly to talk about all the times it's done, but when it's done, it's so it's gripping and it's visceral. That's a good word.
Yeah, we pointed out each time it happened, and the first time it was with the dreamscape, and then it cuts to Cecilia's body lying in the tub, and it's bathed in this harsh blue light, and you see her and laying in the tub bleeding.
Absolutely. With the Virgin Mary card on the floor with a single droplet of blood on it, too. Being just completely blown away by Coppola's direction. Considering this was her first feature film, the amount of, it makes sense for an early film from a director to have, to be really youthful and to be really energetic like this film was. But this film also demonstrated very precise mastery as well. There were no mistakes in it. There were no amateurish mistakes. There were certain things that you would align with the debut picture. Like I said, it is loud. It is probably her most, probably apart from Marie Antoinette, her most energetic movie. because it's very fast moving and things like that.
Yeah, I would say like, but everything she did was pretty intentional, especially like the contrast with the dreamscape to the natural sound, and both visually as well, because it related to what the core of the movie was really all about.
Absolutely. What did you think of the way, I talked about this extensively in my love letter, so I probably won't say this much here. What did you think of the way she framed Kirsten Dunst in this movie? Because you and I aren't typically big Kirsten Dunst fans.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like in some of her movies she just comes across as like kind of deadpan,
Yeah,
or monotone, and the way she framed her for this movie, it really worked for her
I
being
know,
this coy, mysterious teenager.
She seems so full of life in this movie, and
Yeah.
she's so lifeless in like Spider-Man and every other movie I've ever seen her in. Coppola, being an ex-model, I think can view women through. She said she was always self-conscious when she was in front of the camera, but I think that being an ex-model, she knows exactly how to get certain anomalies, certain like indescribable expressions or like framing techniques down to make these otherwise like these beautiful women and use them to their highest potential.
For
Like,
sure.
because no one's ever framed Kirsten Dunst like this, and if people knew how the Coppola method of framing Kirsten Dunst, then she would be incredible in every movie. But
yeah. I would
insane.
say like some of the shots she gets out of her is what makes it so good. Like
it is.
one of the ones that stick out in my mind is when she's on the roof and she's being spied on by the boys. The scene where they're watching her and they're like, she brings someone up on the roof and they have intercourse, and then the boys are like, "Oh, it's over already," and then it shoots to her really fast, and you see her like hunched over with a cigarette.
Yeah.
And just the way they were able to capture her actually kind of humanizes her in the midst of the almost mythology that they build up around all the sisters.
Absolutely. And I hate to jump to the end of the movie, but one of the most haunting scenes in all of American cinema for me will now be the last scene that Kirsten Dunst is in, when she's smoking a cigarette on the couch and invites the boys inside.
Mm-hmm.
Tells them she'll be waiting in the car, unbuckles like the shortest boy's the belt,
Yeah.
and walks off to the car with that backward glance. It's such a haunting scene because, of course, all the girls have already killed themselves, and that's what Kirsten Dunst sets about to do in the garage. So haunting, such a haunting, vivid performance and a very vivid movie. Also, in my love letter analysis, I didn't mention any actors by name except for Kirsten Dunst. This was an insane ensemble, a great cast. I really wanted to talk about Josh Hartnett for a second. He was awesome.
Yeah.
Josh Hartnett, he's also an actor who I don't normally like.
Right.
And so Coppola frames him as like probably Richard Linklater would frame a character from Dazed and Confused.
Yeah.
But the thing is, of course, so it's Coppola, and this movie is about body poetics and like hypersensitive ideas. He is this like hypersexual character throughout his entire piece, which is interestingly like Josh Hartnett's in it for maybe 20 minutes, but in that 20 minutes, he's the focal point of the film.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's never seen again after that. And okay, yeah, let's go into Josh Hartnett's character. Let's analyze him a little bit. I want opinions on the fact that after he took her virginity, after he demystified her, he left her there by herself and then never saw her again. And also, let's contrast that, because Coppola obviously wants us to juxtapose him as a young, hot male with him either in a mental institution or in a rehabilitation center for drugs.
Yeah. As
he's telling the story again. I believe his character's name was Trip Fontaine. Even sounds like a sleazy 70s porn stash.
Yeah, well, I think there's also a juxtaposition between Trip and the other boys.
Oh, yeah.
They both are doing similar things. They're objectifying the girls and putting them on this pedestal and almost like worshiping them as these like mysterious beings from beyond that they can't quite obtain, whereas Trip finally does obtain one of them. And it's interesting because up until that point, you see him being able to get like any girl he wants. He can do whatever he wants. And then the only girl that he does want is Lux, who is not interested in him whatsoever. And that's obviously why he's wants to pursue her so bad, is because he is in lust with her, which he says is love.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the climactic moment where they finally have sex on the football field, as he remarks when he's older, he said it was just different then. So after taking her virginity, she loses that mysterious appeal to him, and he just leaves her there in the field to wake up alone.
Exactly. He was able to experience the most intimate moment of the most private God, like the object, the holy object, though, too.
Right.
Because I think that Coppola understands that young boys view these idols of their fantasies as more than just sticky pages in a porno magazine. Like these, when a boy is obsessed with someone he finds attractive, a young boy, it's as a goddess status. Mm-hmm. It's not as simple as most popular media would have us believe. These boys venerate the women that they're attracted to.
Right. Well, they even the narrator even like explicitly says, like, after they find the diary of Cecilia, that these were women and that they knew everything about them as boys, yet the boys couldn't even begin to fathom them.
Exactly. And speaking of the narrator, I ride or fucking die for Giovanni Ribisi. So gotta mention that his nasally, wonderfully neurotic voice narrated this entire thing, which is actually a good idea because Giovanni always sounds like someone who's overthinking something, and the narrator is constantly, for the rest of his life, overthinking these women because he can't figure them out, and that's the point of them. Let's go there. It took me at least 24 hours to realize that I was trying to figure out why they killed themselves, and we could come up with theories if that's something you're interested in. We could come up with theories easily, but it took me a long time to realize that the virgin suicides defeats analysis.
Right.
That I'm supposed to be viewing this film through Coppola's point of view, and Coppola's point of view is these gawking, worshipping teenage boys.
Right.
And I'm supposed to be looking at it through their eyes with the
narrator.
Yeah, with the knowledge that the narrator is still completely entranced and mystified by the enigmas that was the Lisbon sisters.
Yeah, some people would say that the movie's meaningless because you never know why they killed themselves, what the motive was, but I would say that's not the point of the movie.
Yeah, but you can't, that's not the point of the movie. I absolutely agree. I think that these women aren't supposed to be normalized, that they aren't supposed to be humanized, but Coppola is so smart and so intuitive that she like you said on the roof with Kirsten Dunst, having a human moment. She has human moments every once in a while,
right.
And that's what adds the complication, because she can't just be simply a dream, or else she wouldn't be mysterious.
Right.
What's mysterious are those undefinable and remarkable human moments that you can't make sense of, that you can't fit into the rest of this puzzle of this woman winking at you from the sky.
Right.
You know? Like, it's a goddess and a human at the same time.
Yeah,
and
literally
that's how the
happened.
boy's fantasy works. That is how the male gaze works, at its most romantic, at least. That is how the male gaze works. And Coppola understands, I think, what little boys are attracted to, I think, much... in a really crazy way.
Yeah.
And is able to express that through poetic visuals. Her filmic vocabulary is incredibly large for her first film, and she uses every trick she's ever learned. And do you have anything to say on that?
On what specifically?
On the idea that I've seen comparisons to the Romanov sisters and how they were all murdered. Mm-hmm. I don't think the point of this movie is to figure out why they killed themselves, but to figure out, like, why these women, like, it's not about figuring out why they killed themselves. It's about almost trying to just wrap your brain around the fact that they even existed in the first place or something.
Right. Well, I guess we're kind of like going in the direction of like them being like mythological, which when I was watching the movie, we had brought up like they reminded us of like some kind of mythological creature, and Zach at first said nymphs, and I was like, there's something else, and then it hit me that they look, especially in their prom dresses, like Maenads, which were the
Yes.
worshippers of Dionysus, and they are dressed in these long, flowing white gowns, and the word Maenad, meaning raving one, we'll see these very dreamy cuts of them like dancing around in the field with like putting like flowers everywhere. There was a lot of ties to nature,
Yes.
such as them trying to rescue the tree in their front yard. And then, of course, you mentioned winking in the sky. Like, literally, that happened. You see a Kristen Dunst's face superimposed over the sky, and she's, like, winking from above. So there was definitely a very intentional effort to build up these girls as, like,
as idols,
mythological beings.
As mythological beings. I don't think Coppola wants us to normalize them, because that's what Josh Hartnett does unknowingly, and then he can't even be around her anymore. And I think that's Coppola like saying, don't normalize, don't humanize these girls. Why can't girls just be mythic? They live on forever that way.
Or you could even argue that they were trapped in this mythos, and that's why they had to go and kill themselves in the first place.
Absolutely. And it's almost like life was too stubborn for them, or life was too mundane, and even the raw experience of sex seemed to bore Lux to death.
Yeah.
Who I also compared to a postmodern Artemis, simply because Artemis was the goddess of nature, the hunt, and virginity. Mostly the virginity aspect of it.
Yeah, and speaking of virginity, of course, it's called the Virgin Suicides. It's interesting. I think one of the things that drove these girls to their death was their own parents. The way that they literally imprisoned them in the house. They wouldn't let them leave. They took them out of school. So
it's primarily Kathleen Turner, the mother. It's
right.
These people are played wonderfully by Kathleen Turner and James Woods. By the way.
So we talk about the boys. We talk about Tripp. All these people who put them on a pedestal and put them up as mythological beings, but honestly, the parents do too, especially the mother, because you can see that they're trying to preserve their purity. The parents are trying to preserve their virginness. They are noted as being very strict from the beginning of the movie, and then they're advised by Danny DeVito, the psychiatrist, to loosen up a little bit and let them interact with boys. And then that's when the movie actually starts really spiraling out of control.
Oh, absolutely. And I wanted to go into the parents just a little bit. Just as an aside, there was Nazi symbolism in there, and I think it was and it was in there from certain phrases that one of the sisters would say. And Mr. Lisbon, played remarkably by James Woods, who was not a dick at all in this movie. He always plays a very slimy prick, and he is that in real life, by the way. In this movie, he is the most vulnerable I've ever seen him, and he's remarkable. He's a great actor. I wish he was a better human being. But in the film, Mr. Lisbon shows the boys these plane models from World War II of Nazi airplanes. And I'm pretty sure Coppola was just trying to demonstrate not Nazism, obviously, but the fascistic qualities of suburbia and how these sisters are so beyond that. Like their personalities and their charisma, their charm was just so huge and explosive. They couldn't deal with the stubbornness of suburban life, which at the outset seems very similar, very fascist in a way, if you really want to go to it, because everything is the same. I think that was more the symbolism for the Nazism. But I think that the parents were incredible. I wanted to get your opinion, though, about James Woods's, about Mr. Lisbon kind of losing his mind.
Yeah, you see that... actually, the first time you really see him kind of like dissociating from reality is after Cecilia kills herself.
Yeah.
And the priest comes to the house, and the priest is trying to talk to him about his daughter's death. and then he just starts rambling on about what's on the television. And then a few scenes later, you see him. He's at the school, and he's walking around. Then he starts talking to the plants, and he like has a full blown like conversation. And then one of his colleagues walks up to him, and he acts almost offended that he's interrupted his conversation with the plants.
And you see that, and you hear through hearsay, which is a remarkably smart decision, that he was fired as math teacher.
Yeah.
Good Lord. And by the way, as an aside, no analytical value at all. We were on Hayden Christensen alert. And we saw him as an extra a couple times. He finally had a line, but he was so in the background all the time.
There were a couple times he had a speaking line, and it wasn't even showing his face.
Yeah, it wasn't showing his face, which I love you, Sophia. That's smart. So the small roles were also very well done. Danny DeVito's role as a therapist, and Scott Glenn's role as the priest, who I think Scott Glenn we can credit with the mother losing her fucking mind.
Yeah.
Because he's the one who's like, I listed your daughter's death as an accident, so she's not going to hell, essentially. And also, when Kathleen Turner, Mrs. Lisbon, burns Lux's records, it's after coming home from a very feverish
they said a fired up sermon
from Father Moody. His name's Father Moody, even, Mood. Like, those two, it was an incredible cast, and young Jonathan Tucker was one of the gawking teenage boys. I believe he was a Giovanni Ribisi character. He was very good. What did you think? I thought it was an incredibly touching scene near the end of the movie. This movie just got better and better and better with the different avenues that it went down.
Yeah.
And what did we say it reminded us of, like, at its black humor?
I said at the beginning of the movie it reminded me of Heathers.
And at the beginning it did. And then when the girls are taken out of school and isolated, it turns into like the most poetic of art house like romances with the girls. They live across the street from each other, the gawking boys and the beautiful sisters, and they communicate with each other through Morse code and through calling each other on the telephone and playing records to each other. I thought was just so intimate and yet so removed at the same exact time. I don't even know if there's a proper word for being so, like I said, intimate and far away.
Yeah. Speaking of, like, so there's definitely, like, running themes of, like, intimacy, and I was just thinking of some of the visuals talking about the parents, like, trying to preserve the girl's virginity. It's funny, they have the party when Cecilia comes back from the hospital, and the last thing you see of Cecilia, she's wearing this white dress, almost like she's a bride-to-be, and then she kills herself before she can be taken. And I
love that she was the black sheep of the family, too. She wasn't blonde.
Yeah.
I loved that so much. And that really, I think, reinforces my statement that I'm not supposed to know why these women, young girls, decide to take their lives.
Well, even at the beginning of the movie, the doctor's like, you don't even know how hard life gets. And then she was just like, well, you've never been a 13-year-old girl. And it was so funny because the delivery of the line, it was almost like so bad. But at the same time, I could hear like, one of my 13-year-old nieces saying something like that in that same exact tone and that same exact delivery.
God, it was so awesome, so honest, so clever. Let's see, what did you think of just the sisters as a unit, like as all those different actresses as a unit? I thought they were like so perfectly cast.
It was almost like
they're like different aspects of the same overall being. With Lux as the driving part.
Well, it's pretty cool seeing a lot of the stills that were taken.
Yeah, the production stills that weren't in the movie, and they look so natural, like real photographs.
You could definitely tell they did a really great job casting because there was a very natural chemistry between the girls. They really did feel like sisters when you were watching the movie.
Absolutely, and they obviously had that, I don't know, that sisterly bond with each other. Like, they were all on some sort of telepathic, verbalist, like, plane of thought, plane of existence.
Right.
I think they uniformly decided to kill themselves.
Yeah.
But that scene, I think, is supposed to stay mysterious. Do you want to try to crack into it?
Sure.
Okay. Do you have a theory on why they killed themselves?
So, just from like a very like mundane like reason, it would like they're obviously very depressed and they were very isolated, and it even like brings up like when the boys were like analyzing Cecily's diary, they like talked about like girls being like isolated, and so they obviously like were feeling very desperate, like they needed to escape, and that was kind of like the final option. So
Absolutely,
that'd be a
but
very like realistic.
it gets complicated. Coppola's smart enough to complicate that theory immediately because that's what the boys were there to do. The boys had this. It was so beautifully fucking shot because they had this beautiful fantasy about all the girls in the car heading on the open road of blue and yellow, and it was just so wonderful. And you realize that that's a fantasy and that they're all dead.
Right.
So it complicates that theory by going, well, they were about to be freed. But they chose to remain mysteries. Like, they chose that over freedom. The boys were there to free them. The only way that they knew how. And also the only way the women knew how to.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, though, like, would they have had to come back? Did they know that? Did they know, like, this was pretty much the inevitable end for them? This was, like...
I mean, most likely.
This is the only escape from, like, not only the objectification of their peers, but their parents. You know? The parents want them to remain virgins forever, and
I just think there's enough contradictions and enough like incredible photography in that final scene that like keeps it so mysterious and so God, like a premonition, like seeing Kirsten Dunst in her final scene in the film. She's like a ghost. She's like a fucking ghost. And I think that there's so many contradictions in that one scene of when they discover the bodies and when they talk to Lux.
Yeah, it was pretty shocking because the way the scene is set up, you almost think that they had all just gotten in the car and left for real.
Yeah.
And
I think Coppola knows full well that it's impossible to figure it out. And I think it's supposed to be impossible. And that we're supposed to wonder for literally the rest of our lives. Because we don't have definitive answers. Like I think the narrator says, we have like pieces of something, but we'll never be able to put the whole puzzle together. And I think that they're better off that way. I don't think that we are supposed to humanize these women because, like I said, I feel like Tripp normalized, made Lux human, and then messed it up. And I think that Lux was happier as the virgin goddess that she was. But of course, even when she was having sex with random like burger boys on her roof, so Coppola stays true to her pure intentions of seeing this through the eyes of drooling teenage boys who are also virgins. So even when they watch her on the roof defiling herself, they still see her as that untouchable impossibility that she always was, which I think is really sweet. And I think that Coppola makes her intentions of these women as like near superheroes immediately by introducing them all with that cartoonish, with our names like splattered in a cartoonish way, like they are like the superheroes of this story.
Yeah, well, it's funny. It actually, like, when I saw that scene, it immediately made me think of the movie House.
I love House.
Because when it introduces the heroines of the story, it does that little cute, like, introduction. Dude. It almost reminds me of, like, an anime or a cartoon.
Yeah, Trainspotting did the same thing.
Where, it shows them, and it's, like, that really cool, like, grungy font, like out of one of their journals. Like this is how they This is how they like bubble their name, because
it was out of the journal. That's exactly it. We even see the title card in a bunch of different the Virgin Suicide Journal entry. Like,
and it's funny. Like watching it, it almost makes you wonder, like are they meant to be humanized or are they not? Because then what the way the movie ends, it's kind of sick. It's that party. And the theme was asphyxiation based off of how Lux killed herself.
You see, this is like one of those not rare, I would always love to have like a woman's perspective on these videos. But I think that...
it's almost like, is she being like critical of how people objectify women. Like, this is how it ends up.
I don't think so at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because the boys still keep them holy.
Right.
Because the true believers end up staying up all night lighting with the lighter lit to their like house across the street in some kind of holy like prayer.
It's almost interesting because it's like we actually saw the birth of a religion happening on film.
And I feel like I was converted
because it starts with these girls and then it builds up a mythos around them. They're unobtainable, and because even Tripp, when it shows them 25 years later in the institution, he was saying like that's the last time he ever saw her, and
he is wrecked. He's in like an institution, like he touched the face of God and lived to tell about it.
And he pretty much even said he like never experienced that again. He's like, most people never experience this in their lives, and I was lucky to taste it once. Absolutely. And so you have this like build up of these girls who go from mere mortals to actually becoming these mythological women, to the point that you see what's represented as like their cult following in that party. Yeah. That was more or less like dedicated to them.
Exactly. But I mean, Coppola does frame that party at least as an insincere glorification. But the boys are incredibly sincere.
Yes.
And I was saying, I would always love a women's perspective on these discussion videos, because I bet you dollars to donuts that they would be trying to, that they would, not in a bad way, I think they would humanize them. I think that they would actually know why these girls killed themselves, whereas us as dudes, I think that I'm definitely more along the lines of like, let them be these holy things.
Right.
I did have to call my girlfriend before I made any sort of analysis of it, because I didn't want to just reinforce my own kinks by going, Sofia Coppola must just love the female form as much as I do. But my girlfriend did like validate my beliefs, and I don't think that I'm being wrong, and I don't think that Coppola's intention was to make us feel bad about objectifying these women. I think her intention was to show us a difference between objectifying and like revering something and praying to something.
Right. Because you have, because you almost wonder, like, did they kill themselves to escape the objectification, or, or does it even matter?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Yeah, because, the mystery of why they killed themselves is, like, just...
Yeah, it'll forever be a mystery, like it should. I think that these idols of your youth should remain a mystery, because that's how they remain special.
Yeah, it's almost like, were they doing this because that was the one thing they had control over in their lives? Because one thing that was a recurring theme was like the harsh contrast of dreams and reality.
That's it, Joey. You saying that's the editing. Yeah. That's what the editing is trying to say.
Yeah.
Dreams and reality. That's why it cuts from those romantic moments to the natural sound. That's it. That's why it's editing. It's rhythmic and it's lyrical, but most of all, it's poetic.
Yeah.
You did it.
Thank you.
That was it. Yeah.
I did it. Bam.
No. Good God, do you have any more thoughts? I do know
somewhere
I do
around in there.
contain. I do. Last night when we watched the film, I do feel that yes, this is one of the 3 best directed films of the 90s. I would say, and directed films, not necessarily the best film of the 90s. Although, Virgin Suicide is fucking great, and it has all my favorite qualities of 90s filmmaking in it.
Yeah, for sure.
But so far as just best directed, like best put together films of the 90s, I would say there's Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, there's Michael Mann's Heat, and there is Sofia Coppola's The Virgin Suicides. I would say it's one of the best. If you were to ask me for a great film that encapsulates everything that was perfect in the artistic world of the 90s, I would probably refer you to something like The Virgin Suicides, because that does. It's all of those different styles of the 90s perfected in the final year of that decade.
Yeah. It's funny, I keep getting hung up on, like, why could they have killed themselves?
But I think that's what you're supposed to do, because now in your brain, you're, like, making them larger than what they were.
Because it's interesting that they purposefully lured the boys to the house.
That's the part that complicates it so heavily.
To find their bodies, because they
knew that the boys would venerate them forever after finding them like that. They knew that they would forever be their followers.
Yeah, they literally are signaling for help through Morse code, and then when they get there to help them, they built themselves up as
gods in their eyes,
right?
And then made them fall in love with them for the rest of their lives. Like that has, because there's so many complications and contradictions in that final scene that I don't think there is an answer as to why they killed themselves, and that it's just theories. But there's just, I think, dozens of different theories about why they killed themselves, and I don't think that matters. What matters is that you're wondering, just like the boys are,
right,
endlessly down these different avenues.
Which I guess is really the point of the movie, more so than
the point of Coppola's movie was a very sincere male gaze.
Yeah. Well, it's funny is I think you said outside of the podcast that Sofia Coppola said that her movies aren't about being, they're about becoming.
Absolutely.
Which is literally what happens. It's not about them existing, it's about them becoming and transcending.
Exactly. It's about becoming. Yes, that's exactly it. Mm-hmm. I think that's the perfect analysis of the film, is that this film isn't a film about being, it is a film about becoming.
Yeah.
I think that's it. Any final thoughts, Joey?
I would say overall this movie is very riveting and definitely leaves you
astonished. It's very surprising. I didn't expect any of this.
Yeah, I guess that guttural noise was like a pretty good way to put how the movie made me feel.
It made me fall in love with Sofia Coppola.
Oh yeah, for
heartbeat. She's one of my favorite filmmakers of all time right now.
Yeah, at the moment the only other movie I've seen of hers was Lost in Translation. Which
comparatively, it has the same idea of like a beautiful woman in captivity and isolation, right. But isn't Lost in Translation is so much more slowed down in tempo.
And funnily enough, it actually kind of ends almost on the same note. Like they with Scarlett Johansson and
Bill Murray.
Bill Murray. They had that final scene in the crowd where they you hear. I think she whispers something to him, or is it vice versa? And then you never know what is actually said, and then
I think that we can transfer that statement of Coppola's of my films are not about being but becoming to every one of her movies, and they make perfect sense. She expresses the inexpressible.
Well, it's kind of funny because I feel like it still is almost a critique of the male gaze, because it's almost like you can try your hardest to captivate and control women.
Yes.
And they're still going to be unobtainable.
And I think it's brilliant that Giovanni Ribisi is the overly obsessed narrator of the Virgin Suicides, and in Lost in Translation, Coppola casts him as the clinically disinterested husband or boyfriend to Scarlett Johansson.
So I would say if her point was for you to not humanize them, it's in the sense to tell the male viewer you can try as hard as you want, but you're not going to ever be able to own.
You're never going to be able to capture these women.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful statement. And I wish that any male filmmaker had that kind of maturity of his own sexuality to make this statement. It took a female director making films from the point of view of the male gaze to do this, which is so fascinating and complicated. Yeah, and I could write a dissertation paper on that.
I would say most films like this, you would have the Kirsten Dunst character who's almost like the manic pixie dream girl.
Yes,
where she's
but in a really different way. I'm sorry.
Yeah, whereas usually they succumb to the whoever the main male protagonist is of the movie, whereas this had a very different ending, where she eventually ended up just transcending all of that altogether.
Absolutely. Which I think is what she wanted.
Yeah.
To be transcendental, to transcend above suburbia, and above the stubbornness of life.
Exactly.
Oh my God, Sofia Coppola. Duh. God, is my final thoughts is it's a masterpiece and essential viewing for anyone who has a serious love for film. And I think it's one of the most complex views of the idealized female form.
Mm-hmm.
I think they could probably say that for all of Sofia Coppola's movies, but this one in particular has the most energy out of all of them.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share. Jesus Christ, Sofia Coppola rules.
Woo!